Hello, and welcome to the continuation of the verbs lecture, where we'll focus on the verbs was and were, as well as the transitive and transitive verbs with a special focus on lie and lay. Let's get started. I want you to take a look at these three sentences. The first one, we wish it was possible to drive from San Diego to New York in 3 hours. If I was you, I would take business English. And if John was here before us, he probably left a message at the front desk. Only one of these is grammatically correct. Think about it. Do you know which one? Let me show you. If John was here before us, he probably left a message at the front desk. That's the only one that's correct. That's because in these first two, rather than was, we actually need the verb were. We wish it were possible, and if I were you. Why is that the case? We'll take a look. Here's the rule. You want to use were instead of was after the words if, as though, or wish, if what you're about to state is something that's contrary to fact, simply not true, or highly doubtful or impossible. And you can use was if the statement is true. So thinking about those sentences we just saw, we were talking about driving somewhere in a few hours. That was impossible. And the second one, it was if I was you, and well, I can't be you. So that's always if I were you. But that third one, we were saying, if John was here, and John could have been here, that's the only time that was would actually work. So let's take a look at what some of those exercises might look like in Self-Assessment G. Simple rule. You can feel free to pause this and give Self-Assessment G a try to see if you can distinguish between using was and using were. Let's move on to some of our troublesome verbs. Lie, lay, sit, set, and rise and raise. Just to get started, I like to give you a definition of what each of them mean. And it's important to understand the difference between those verbs that have an I, like lie, sit, and rise, versus the others, lay, set, and raise. You'll notice that those with the I in them are seeming to indicate things like lie means in position, sit means in position, resting and reclining, rise, though, means to stand up or get out of bed. Lay means in motion or place or put. Set means in motion or place or put. And raise means to lift something up or to lift someone else up. Or it can also mean to bring up children and animals, such as I raise chicken and pigs. Interesting. Let's move on to see where we get into trouble with these. Do you remember our principal parts? Do you remember when we talked about the present versus the past participle versus the present participle? This table should look familiar. And here's where things get tricky. The present tense of lie is lie. Its past tense is lay. The past participle, which will always use a helper, is a word you've probably never even heard called lain, and its present participle is lying. But look at this. The word lay is a present tense, laid, and laying, and this is where things get tricky when we use the word lay. Are we talking about something that I'm going to lay, like I'm going to lay my head down, or I'm going to lay bricks? Or are we simply talking about being in rest and recline, as in yesterday I lay in the sun? These others, sit, set, rise, raise, pretty straightforward, but do take a look at their principal parts. Sit, sat, sitting, set, setting, rise, rose, risen, rising, raise, raised, raising. This one is the only one that looks like our regular verbs that we've been working with. All the rest of these are not only unusual words, but can often be messed up when they're used. Let's take a look at the rules. Let's take a look at a few examples and see if we can find the difference between these two verbs and which is the proper choice. In this first sentence, John lay the papers on the desk, or John laid the papers on the desk. Well, what we're really looking at is, do we want the past tense of lie, which is lay, or the past tense of lay, which is laid? And what we have to ask ourselves is, do we have an object or not? And in this case, we do. We have an object, papers. We're actually putting something down. John's actually doing some kind of action here. You can actually see him putting those papers on the desk. So what you want then is not the verb lie. You want the verb lay, and you want its past tense, which is laid. John laid the papers. You can see that action. And the second one, today I will lie on my bed for a nap, or today I will lay on my bed for a nap. Well, what the question you have to ask is, do you want the present tense, we're at today, of the verb lie, or the present tense of the verb lay? Well, look for your object. Do you have an object here, or are you just kind of resting and reclining? On my bed for a nap, on my bed for a nap. These are prepositional phrases. There is no object. There is no noun. Therefore, I'm going to choose what's called the intransitive verb, lie. Today I will lie on my bed for a nap. If it was yesterday, I could say, yesterday I lay on my bed for a nap. I would still be using this verb, but I'd be using the past tense of it. Interesting. Let's take a look at this one. We're still in today, but we're saying today I will lay my head on the pillow, or today I will lie my head on the pillow. And again, am I choosing the verb lie, or am I choosing the present tense of the verb lay? Ask if you have an object. Is there actually something you're putting down? Is there something receiving the action? In this case, yeah, you do have an object. You do have a noun, your head. So what's interesting then, if you're going to lay your head on the pillow, and I just gave you the answer, this is the correct one. Today I will lay my head on the pillow. Let's continue on for more of an explanation of those transitive and intransitive verbs. You need to understand the difference between what we call transitive and intransitive verbs. A transitive verb is something that will receive the action. It has an object, such as the boss dropped. Dropped what? The ball. This is a transitive verb. It's action, of course, but there's something that's receiving that action, the ball. If you need to see that, take a ball and drop it, and you can see that that ball is receiving the action. The workers retrieved the ball or picked up the ball. In this case, again, you can almost see the workers bending down to pick up the ball. There's action, and the ball is receiving the action. These are transitive verbs. And the way you know you have one is to ask whom or what after the verb. The receiver of the action is the object. What if we're talking about Daniel? Daniel studying. We would say Daniel studied. Daniel studied what? The material. What about Kayla? Kayla gave Daniel her notes. In this case, Daniel and the notes are receivers of the action. We wouldn't just say Kayla gave. We could, but would be like, Kayla gave what? We're waiting on something there. That's how we know we've got a transitive verb. Contrast that with our intransitive verbs. Those are verbs that don't have objects, like the boss travels frequently. Amisha feels tired. Please lie down and don't sit here. Well, here are our verbs, but where are the objects? This isn't an object. This isn't a noun. It's not receiving action. Neither is this, nor this, nor this. So lie, sit, and rise are intransitive verbs. They will not take objects, whereas lay, set, and raise are transitive verbs, and they'll require objects. So think about that again. Those with the I in the middle are the intransitive ones. That's how you'll remember. But the main thing is intransitive, no object. Let's move on. Sometimes you can have something that looks as if there is no object, but in fact there is. Oh my. And that's a particular convention or a particular way in which a sentence is written. It's written in what we usually call the passive voice. But what happens is in that kind of voice is that the subject receives the action. And the way that these sentences are set up is that you usually have some kind of being verb helper and a past participle, an ed. For example, the workers were reprimanded and the boss was fired. Now I could say the boss fired June, and I would say, well, then who was fired? Well, June was fired. The boss fired her. And there we would be working in our conventional wisdom with our subject, our transitive verb, and our object. But in this case, the boss was fired. Who was fired? The boss. Can you see how the boss is receiving the action? Up here, can you see how the workers are receiving the action? It's because we're using this passive voice. We're using this being verb helper, this was and were, along with this past participle. The action goes back. Nathan was nominated. Daisy's award should have been given to her yesterday. Take special note on these because in this case, your subject is receiving the action. I would like you to take a look at self-assessment H. See if you can discern between lie and lay. And I also think they ask you whether something is transitive or intransitive. and pause this recording to give that a try. Self-assessment I is one of the ones I consider a little more important, so give that a try as well. Thank you for listening to the Business 125 lecture on verbs continued with was, were, lie, and lay. If you have questions about the self-assessments, be sure to listen to the self-assessment answers where I give additional tips and tricks. Thanks.